Hello and welcome back to You Can Play Europa Universalis IV, the series that tries to teach some basic concepts about the game, one at a time, only one per episode, and tries to do it in a way that is beginner friendly and not overwhelming so that you can get in and go play this game. Welcome back. Thank you for sticking around. Today I want to talk about combat. So in this episode, we're taking the one of the campaigns we've been working on as a full Let's Play, and we're going to look at what combat looks like. I don't mean full war, which we will need to get to as well, but specifically how things are measured. So when you bring your 32,000 troops against 12,000 troops, you're going to win that, almost certainly, but why? What's the math? Without overthinking the math, what are the elements that go into that decision, and how can you predict ahead of time what's good, what's enough, how much you need to be able to fight a battle. So to start with, the most important thing is to understand is that it all comes down to rolls, dice rolls specifically, in that every time you actually get into the battle, the amount of damage each side does to the other is based on a dice roll. And then that dice roll is influenced by, in a lot of the same ways that Monarch points are influenced by bonuses to both your leader here, which is very explicit in the dice roll, but also secondarily and a little bit behind the scenes is also influenced by these pips. So as you upgrade your units and get new units available as you go through the technologies, and they have these pips, know that the advantage of those pips is to influence actually how much damage you do based on the roll you provide. Well, actually, this makes more sense if we actually go into the screen and look at it. So we're about to beat up on Rohikand here as Moar, and good. So we saw there the amount of damage you do kind of pops up as the battle continues. And in fact, we took more damage there than we gave. Now, why is that? We clearly have a better general. We clearly have a lot more troops. Ultimately, we are going to win this battle. But let's start with the dice rolls. So this dice can roll anything between a 0 and a 9. 9 being very good, 0 being very, very bad. And then it is modified by a variety of things. So at the start of combat, basically the defender, which is the enemy here, and the attacker each roll a single die. He rolled an 8, I rolled a 0. That is going to be sort of the base foundation that all other calculations are going to be applied by. Now, like I said, there's another calculation going into here about each element of troop and what their individual pips are. While you're going to think about combat in terms of your army versus this army, it's important to actually realize that the way the game is calculating it is on a very specific one-by-one level. So you can see here that we have a lot of troops engaged in the combat, and each one of them are fighting some troops on the other side. And there are empty spaces here as well. So there's different things that influence how many troops you can get in to combat at the same time. For example, this guy over here, Poor Bondir's 2nd Regiment, isn't even in the fighting right now, simply because our combat width, which is a element that is improved over time, combat width right here, every few levels when you improve your combat width, what's that saying is the amount of troops you can get into a fight at any given moment. So these regiments over here, even though they're on the front line, aren't actually engaged in battle. Now, part of that is because they don't have a lot of troops down here. So there's a lot of factors that go in here. So these little slashes here are our cavalry. You can see those slanted arrows mean that they're flanking. These X's here are infantry, and back here we have our artillery, which is also in the battle, even though they're not specifically being attacked. So all that, don't overthink this part. Know that the bigger your army is great, But your combat width is going to influence how many of those large army elements you can get into the fight at the same time. Now, I mention it because each of these is doing damage to the group they're fighting. So my 0 plus any pit modifiers for the 17th Regiment is doing damage over here. Conversely, Sam Paul's 3rd Regiment is taking their 8 plus any combat modifiers that specific unit has and applying it over here. Those modifiers can be everything from the type of troop you have, to your technology, to your ideas. So, siege ability. Well, no, there's let's see, do I have combat ability? Obviously, discipline helps. But if you're looking for like quality, I think it is. Yeah, infantry combat ability. Even though you wouldn't see this as a specific number, it just makes those one-to-one battles more powerful. So we have 0, -1, because we have a terrain disadvantage. We're the attacker, and we're fighting in some hills, which means all of our dice are going to get a -1 to them. We are even, so you can see here that our leader has a fire 3. His leader has a fire 3, so we get no bonus here. If we, in the next phase, you see my shock is 5, his shock is 2, we're going to get our roll +2, -1. Our roll +2 for the fact that we have 2 more shock than he does, -1 for the terrain element. So let's see that. So we're going to take a little more damage than he is here during this phase because we rolled really poorly. But at the same time, our morale is much better. We have better discipline. Discipline influences the amount of damage done divided by the opponent's military tactics. So higher tactics reduces the amount of damage you take. Discipline increases the amount of damage you do. Morale both increases a damage element, but also, really importantly, defines how long you can stay in the battle. So he's not going to be able to stay in the battle very long, though he'll probably get crushed. So we'll see here numbers popping up above. In this fire phase, you'll see us taking a little more. I think we might flip that in the shock phase. So let's just see here. Yep, you can see we're taking about 100 more. Shock, great. So here's that +2 I was talking about. We rolled a 2 again, which means we're not going to do a ton of damage. The higher that damage roll, the higher that roll, and this is the simplest way to think about it if you're just fighting for the first time, the higher your total here, the more punch you're going to put on the other side, the more casualties you're going to cause. And that applies for both attacker and defender. You want to have higher rolls than your enemies. Doesn't mean you'll definitely win the battle, but it certainly gives you more chance. So we should see now that we're going to do, I would say, substantially more damage than our enemy here. Maybe twice as much, maybe not. Let's see. So yeah, about twice as much, 218 versus 439. That's a function of the dice roll, plus the fact that we just do more damage because of our higher discipline here. So we'll let that roll for a bit. We'll see what the next roll is. Fire. So this is interesting because we both rolled very high, which means it should be a relatively even battle. Again, we may do a little more just because our bonuses are slightly better, I think, and our modifiers are slightly better. But these will be much higher numbers than they have been, so we'll be doing a lot of damage to each other. Right? Oh, wow. So he can't do... Okay. So we did a lot more damage. We did 826 to him. He only did 200 or so to us. There's another important reason for that. As you lose army in a fight, the effectiveness of any given regiment goes down. So we can't, I don't think we can look at it here, but he's lost about half, which means that all his regiments are fighting at sort of half strength. Their morale is down. So even though they rolled that 9, they just don't have the manpower anymore. Like, our combat width is much, much greater. We're putting a lot more pressure on them. We have a lot more artillery firing into them. And by the way, our artillery, like a fire phase, not surprisingly, that's where artillery shine. So you can see here, they have a bonus pips to fire phase that they don't get during the shock phase. Their combat ability is up. In fact, here you can see that their modifier for cannons during the fire phase, that's when they do their damage. They take it times a 2.4 modifier as opposed to shock when they really don't do much. So this is going to end relatively quickly at this point. Even though, this is a great example, even though we rolled about the same, the fact that they've lost so much at this point, and the fact that our modifiers are now much, much better, completely hamstrings them. So if you are in that place where your morale is very low, you need to think about the fact that it's going to continue to reduce your ability to fight during the battle, not just coming out of it and regrouping later on, but during that battle, your ability to put pain on the other side is going to go down as you take more casualties among your army. So this is going to be over fairly quickly here. Yep. Great. Hang on. We're going to move that. So they're down to almost nothing here. We get the shock phase. We don't roll very well, but we're still doing a lot more damage. And in fact, we won. So that's the basics of combat, right? If at its core, I think the most important things to know is that those rolls are the central part of it. So as you go into that phase, you're going to roll a dice. You're going to want to think about, where am I fighting into, and am I the attacker or defender? Because if you're the defender, any terrain penalties are going to be to your advantage. If you're the attacker, they're going to be to your disadvantage. You can, You can see here in the province that in the case of something like mountains, there's a penalty for the attacker. In the case of something like farmland, you see there is no modifier. There's never a modifier where the attacker gets a bonus. I don't think I say that. And then let's find some mountains. Yeah, mountains are the worst. Do not attack into mountains unless you are supremely confident that you're going to win, and you're just fine taking a whole bunch of casualties because they will pull a Sparta at Thermopylae on you. Sweet 300 reference. So hopefully this helps. There's a lot of other things that you want to think about. So as you look through things that give you bonuses, as you look at events that come up, notice when it says it's going to give you a morale improvement, because that morale, we saw how much larger our morale was than the enemy. That's more damage. That's also more ability to stay in the fight. So things like stability actually influence that. Things like I think great power. I'm trying to remember. There's some other things that prestige, that's it. Prestige improves our morale by 10%. Stability here improves our morale. I think I thought it improved morale. I'm just thinking of stability or prestige. There are different things. The point is that there's a lot of numbers in this game. It's easy to kind of forget where things are. The important thing to recognize is when events come up, when you're selecting your ideas, like defensive, one of the reasons I take defensive is this 15% increase to morale. Even though this is called defensive ideas, that is a huge boost to your ability to go on the offensive as well and stay in a fight. Because if you are taking, penalties as a result of terrain, and you have low morale, you may not be able to sustain it, even if you have superior numbers, even if you're likely to ultimately win the fight. If you can't stay in it, if you can't do a little extra damage, you're not going to be as good. Dice rolls, strongly influenced by leaders. In most cases, particularly at the beginning of a fight, if you have relatively fresh armies, there's a lot of that. Those dice rolls are going to be a major influence. As the battle goes on, it becomes less predictable, particularly as each side starts taking significant casualties. So the dice rolls aren't an end-all be-all, right? If you roll a 9, it does not always mean that you will deal X amount of damage. That's going to be dependent on how well reinforced your individual units are, how well reinforced the enemy units are, is their ability to fight back going down. So those numbers will change over time. But if you just really pay attention to kind of having a fresh army that has, its regiments at full strength as much as possible, then it's really all about the dice rolls. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into how combat works in Europa Universalis IV. The easiest way to think about it is often numbers just win, regardless of a situation. If you're going into a fight and you have twice as many men as the other side, all things being relatively equal, you've got a good chance. Now, if you're 4 techs behind in military and you are attacking into mountains, you may get wiped out. So don't forget to think about the terrain you're fighting in. Don't forget to think about how strong your military leader is compared to the other military leader. Don't forget to think about and keep your military technology as up to date as you can. And those things are going to make you more successful in your battles. Hopefully this made sense. I'd love to hear what you think. Other things you'd be looking for us to cover. Hoping to get back onto a relatively regular frequency of these. And anyway, until then, go play some EU4. You can do it. Till next time, my name's Sean Sands. Thank you. I'll see you soon.